Today in history, July 11th, 1804, Vice President Aaron Burr fatally shot Alexander Hamilton, former Secretary of the Treasury, in a duel in Weehawken, New Jersey. Now, why did this happen? Well, there's a lot to unpack here. So let's go back a few months earlier. In February of 1804, while attending a play with his wife and daughter, Hamilton noticed that someone in the audience was making rude comments about him. Now, mind you, dueling was already illegal in New York and New Jersey, but it was still very common among gentlemen to settle political or personal dispute. Burr then went straight to the newspapers to publish a formal challenge to Hamilton, accusing him of slander and calling him an obstacle to his political career. You see, Burr had been eyeing the presidency for a while now, but Hamilton, who had recently retired from his position as Secretary of the Treasury, knew that Burr wasn't qualified to be president and warned the public accordingly, and both Burr and Hamilton were definitely... He then attended King's College, now known as Columbia University, where he graduated top of his class in 1773. There, he impressed everyone around him, and eventually caught the attention of John Jay, who appointed him as his aide. Then after the war, he continued working with John Jay as he helped negotiate a peace treaty with Great Britain. And as a result, he was appointed as the first Secretary of the Treasury under President George Washington. Throughout college, he was known for his charismatic personality and excellent debating skills. And after the controversial Alien and Sedition Acts were passed, he began openly criticizing President John Adams, which led to his resignation in 1795. These accomplishments, along with the fact that he had helped the nation win the war, established him as one of America's most powerful figures. And by age 21, he was running his own law practice in New York City, could be transferred to Haynes, more able and better qualified to conduct them with utility to the nation. To which he replied, "You certainly would not have been prevailed upon to stand again, if it had not been for the maniacal violence of the other party. They have goaded you into it, and they will be the occasion of all the misery you will suffer." However, when Hamilton received the letter, he refused to accept the challenge, instead demanding that the fight take place with pistols. And by saying that they had forced him into running for office, he implied that Hamilton wanted him to become president simply to continue his influence over the country. However, when he realized that President Adams' views were too different from his own, he changed strategies and decided to support Thomas Jefferson instead. As a result, Federalists lost control of the government, and Hamilton's political career effectively came to an end. He was still willing to defend it with his life, which brings us back to his fateful encounter with Vice President Aaron Burr. And upon exiting the theater, he discovered it was none other than Vice President Aaron Burr. The gentlemen having taken their stations, Mr. Burr fired, and immediately after the report, Mr. Hamilton fell. His handkerchief dropped from his hand, which had before been held to his breast. Mr. Hamilton behaved with a dignity that excited the admiration of all present. Mr. Burr ran to him. Every countenance was pale, except the Viceroy's, who was ghastly as death. But before we continue, now let's get back to the duel. He was lifted up and carried to a house in this vicinity. At 1 o'clock, the firing was repeated. The result was fatal to Mr. Hamilton. And what might our country look like today if the outcome had been different? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you did, please consider subscribing and joining me on my quest to bring the best historical stories to the internet. His hat and upper garments were taken off, and he was placed on a sofa in a room near the ferry house. He expired at 2 o'clock. And because of this, it's important that we understand exactly who Alexander Hamilton was and what he accomplished during his lifetime. And therefore, it was unconstitutional. The two men began arguing, and Hamilton stated that if the vice president ever spoke to him again, he would challenge him to a duel. Nevertheless, Hamilton died the next day, and Burr was widely vilified as a murderer. Suppose the tendency of the course of his conduct is to overthrow the government, to destroy the elevated rank which he partakes, and to substitute some other mode of government incompatible with liberty. And although his political career had already begun to collapse before the duel, this was effectively the end of it. And this was likely what he had in mind when he said, I have killed my man, and I believe it was necessary. And whoever was still alive after the third round would fire a fourth and final shot at the other. But when it was Burr's turn to fire, Hamilton had already been mortally wounded, and nobody expected him to survive. What would be the verdict of such a jury? Guilty, without hesitation. I am confident. And so, in a letter to his friend Abigail, he explained exactly why he didn't want anyone to replace him in office. This is believed to be the reason why she sent young Alexander to live with his maternal grandfather, who was able to secure him a prestigious education. But before we continue, now let's get back to the timeline. And this tension eventually came to a boiling point at a party hosted by Vice President Thomas Jefferson in 1796. In response, Burr challenged him to a formal all-male fistfight, stating that neither man could bring in reinforcements, nor could they use any weapons except their fists. Now, despite the fact that dueling was illegal, many citizens supported these two men's right to settle their differences, even though it took the life of one of America's founding fathers. He was born out of wedlock in 1755 or 1757. He was the son of a woman who had affairs with multiple wealthy men, leaving his true parentage unknown. As a child, he read everything he could get his hands on and quickly became well-versed in literature, philosophy, and history. However, once the American Revolutionary War broke out, he abandoned his legal career to join the Continental Army, where he served under George Washington. It was through this position that Hamilton helped draft a New York plan, which outlined how states should apportion representation in Congress based on population and gave greater voice to smaller states. Although he was never directly involved in combat during the war, his service during this time made him a war hero in the eyes of many Americans. As secretary, he was responsible for establishing the nation's first bank, creating a national mint, and enforcing the first tax. But as time went on, he began to make enemies. Now, initially, the two men had been close friends, but as time went on, Adams grew frustrated with Hamilton's constant criticism of his policies. You see, in order to avoid another term as president, John Adams had chosen not to run for re-election. He wrote, "My feelings on this subject have been so long and so well known that no event in politics would suit me so well as the reins of government." Although Adams did not reveal who the other party was, historians believe that he was referring to Hamilton, who was considered the leader of the Federalist Party at the time. And the truth is, after serving 2 terms under George Washington, Hamilton actually wanted the same thing. So in 1800, when the presidential election between incumbent John Adams and Thomas Jefferson was thrown into the House of Representatives, he used his influence to ensure that Jefferson won. To make things worse, just 4 years later, he engaged in a highly publicized argument with James Madison, who succeeded Jefferson in 1801 over the Embargo Act, which placed trade restrictions on several nations in an effort to protect American shipping. In his writing, Hamilton argued that since the embargo only applied to American ships, it would hurt American merchants far more than the nations it was intended to punish. In response, Madison accused him of disloyalty, to which Hamilton defended himself by saying, "Suppose a citizen of a free country, duly licensed, takes up arms against the government which he helps to support." And while that may seem like a strange comparison to make today, it was a way of him explaining that even though he was a critic of the government, after insulting each other publicly for months, the two finally met for a duel on July 11th, 1804, in Weehawken, New Jersey. There were 5 witnesses to the event, but fortunately, one of them brought a reporter along, who published the following account. Mr. Hamilton appeared to be in pain. Mr. Burr's conduct throughout the whole affair was perfectly manly. You see, according to the rules of the duel, each man had to fire 3 shots. So rather than take the life of his opponent, Burr fired into the air. Despite the evidence proving his innocence, he was never tried for the crime. He spent the remainder of his life traveling abroad and practicing law until his death in 1836. But what do you think? Was the Hamilton duel an unfortunate accident or a necessary sacrifice for the sake of honor? As always, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you learned something new. And until next time, remember to stay informed. Most importantly, stay free.